Hi. So, yeah, you're probably looking at this and thinking, what? How the fuck has he made a video that's over an hour long about only 20 movies? Well, the answer is I'm me. Yeah, it's Luke. What are you going to do? But you're in luck. If you're not interested in watching this video because it's so long and I only cover 20 movies, I will be posting just for you a 20-ish minute version in which I went through everything. I didn't cut this version down. I did a separate own quickfire version. Quickfire, and it was still almost 20 minutes. Where I go through my top 20 very quickly, and so you can kind of get everything you want to hear as quickly and efficiently as I could possibly manage, again, being me. So look out for that one, which I'll probably post at the same time as this one. So you have an option. You can hear me ramble on about these films, or you can hear me talk about them very quickly. So it's up to you which one you want to watch. Don't watch both. Again, I mean, I say different things about the films in each video, but at the same time, it's the same movies and the same opinion. So anyway, on with this extended and, for the most part, uncut version of my top 20 films of 2018. Here we go.
Well, here it is. If anybody wants to see it.
Hello and welcome, finally, to my top 20 films of 2018. Holy shit, it's been a long road to get to this point. I thought I'd be doing this in the first week of January, and here we are. And many of the films I've seen in the past 2 months have entered my top lists, the top half of my 2018 viewings, of which there have been many. I think I've broken a record, at least in the past 5 years. I think 2013 was a huge year for me in watching so many films from that year. But I have smashed the previous, like 2017, 2016, 2015. I've seen over 105 films, I think, from 2018. And there's still a few more I want to get to, but I need to just decide that it's time to give up and to finally do my fucking top 20 of 2018. So that's what I'm doing here in this video. And there will also be my top 30 damn good films of 2018, which will be following this video directly, because there's so many other films I thought were great this year. As far as like ratio, there's been so many great films in 2018. If I look back to 2017, like the top half were so strong for genre movies, like Last Jedi, Blade Runner 2049, War for the Planet of the Apes, Logan, just incredible films. So like for me, like the top 5 of 2017 beats the top 5 of 2018, but 2018 as a whole beats 2017 just for the sheer amount of variety, like so many different genres excelling in ways that just blew me away. Honestly, I think it's been a phenomenal year, and my list has been changing so much, and I feel like it was just so hard to whittle down to 20, but it's always been tradition for me to do top 20, so you will see essentially my number 50 to my number 21 in the next video. And I have also decided in the next month or two, I will be doing another installment of The List, which is where I go through every film I've seen of that year in order of my least favorite to my favorite. Now, when I do make the 2018 version of The List, which is totally ripped off from and appropriated from CP from Willie Screedia, by the way, but when I do that, I will have seen a few more films, and I will also rewatch quite a few of my top 20 to kind of recalibrate it a bit, see which films hold up more on repeat viewings, and refine that top 20. But also I will kind of breeze through the top 50 because you'll already have heard me talking about them a lot in these videos. So hopefully you kind of we've done the kind of the housekeeping now, and I can get right in to my top 20 films. My favorite films, it's always worth noting, unless I explicitly state otherwise, it's always my favorite, not what I believe is the best. So let's get into it. At number 20, we have Faces, Places, directed by Agnès Varda and JR, two French artists who couldn't be more different in lots of ways. And one's a man, one's a woman, one's, I think, in his 30s, and one is in her 80s. And Agnès Varda is a hero of mine. I think she's just wonderful. I discovered her films a few years ago. She hasn't made a film in a very long time, but collaborated with JR, who is more of a mural artist. and made this film about the two of them traveling around France and taking pictures of people and taking those pictures and taking those faces and putting them in murals across different buildings and making projects for the locals. And it's just it's an absolute delight of a film. I just loved it so much. It's quirky. It has kind of Varda's sense of humor seeping through every moment, as all of her films do. It just has her personality all over it, but it was really endearing to see the interplay between her and JR, which they kind of play with a little bit, especially towards the end, which was really, really cool. And, you know, it's not a film that's going to set your world on fire. It's not a film that's going to really do all that much. Like, it's not a particularly moving film. It's not a particularly exciting film. But it's all about art and people and kind of celebrating people who never get celebrated. And there's just something so wonderful about it. I loved every second and can't wait to buy it and watch it again and again. You know, for a while this was in my kind of the top end of my list. It's been pushed down a bit by films that are a lot better and that I've enjoyed even more. But I'm glad that the way I looked at it, this really did deserve to be in the top 20, and so it is. Number 19, Three Identical Strangers, another documentary, in fact, and this was directed by Tim Wardle and is an incredible true story. I mean, it's a documentary, of course it's a true story, but I remember putting this on and Connie was kind of, I think she was painting, and she kind of saw the beginning and she kind of came over to the sofa and sat down and was watching the opening minutes, and then she just stayed for the entire duration. She couldn't drag herself away from the TV screen. It is a captivating story about a man who, in the early 80s, I believe, is going to college for the first time. And when he arrives, everyone recognizes him and, you know, it's great to see you. And he's like, what are you talking about? And he realizes they think he's someone else who looks exactly like him. So he calls up the person who they think he is and realizes he's speaking to himself on the phone. And he goes and meets him, and it's his exact copy, his twin brother, separated at birth and adopted to different parents. This becomes a news item, and there is another man who looks at the newspaper and says, oh, there's two of me. There's a third identical brother. So they're brought together again, and, you know, I think they were like 18, 19, 20 when they were reunited. And it's all about their life following that, dealing with that, but also digging into the deeper mystery of why they were separated and why, in fact, they were probably intentionally separated for a reason that is very shocking. And it's just a story that offers so many twists and turns. The production of this documentary is fantastic in that we don't just have talking heads and archival footage. The way that this film is constructed really takes the mystery element. It becomes like a detective movie at times, and really just draws everything out to these heartbreaking moments. And it's just an incredible story that is serviced incredibly in this fantastic documentary. Number 18, Spike Lee's Black Klansman. This one hurt to put this low on my list, I have to say. When I first saw this film, it went straight to my number 2 of the year. I thought it was phenomenal, and I think in many ways it is one of the best films of 2018, and certainly the most important film of 2018. Not because of the issues that it brings up, but the way in which it kind of, at the end there, kind of shows us that those issues aren't anywhere near gone in the way that we might think they are. Because you look at this story set in the 1970s about a real man who was in the police force, a black man in the police force, and he calls up the KKK and asks if he can join and become a member. And so they send one of the white police officers to basically be ingratiated and kind of brought into the Klan, while they speak to the black version of this guy on the phone at the police station. And it's just this amazing true story. That's a theme in this list, an amazing true story. And the depiction of the KKK is just unflinching in this film. But what Spike Lee does that is so fantastic is he takes this really, really serious, heavy story that is you know, the foundation is truth. I think the opening credit says the following was based on some for real shit, and it, you know, couldn't be more appropriate. It really couldn't. But what he does with that is he tells it unflinchingly. He tells it in a way that shows you the horror of these people, but he does it in a way that allows you to laugh, that allows you to be entertained by the film. It's not this dire 2 hour kind of look how bad everything was. It shows you some glimmers of humanity in certain of characters outside of the clan, obviously, and drives it along in this way that you know, at times they're talking about blaxploitation movies, and at times, you know, you're just laughing at the sheer ridiculousness of this KKK, you know, head wizard speaking to a black man on the phone and not realizing that he is. And you know, so in some cases you need humor and you need to be able to laugh at things, because otherwise life just gets too overbearing and overwhelming. And Spike Lee really expertly balances that in this film. I mean, it certainly goes for the jugular. It certainly goes for that heavy hitting side of the story, but it allows us to be entertained by it at the same way. And the build up to that final couple of sequences, and the music is great, the score is fantastic, and the way that he made the film, you know, the choices that he made and the editing. And there's a montage of this elderly black man talking about this horrific story that was true, I believe, and that's juxtaposed with the clan members watching Birth of a Nation and just reveling in this. I mean, it's just powerful filmmaking at its finest, I think, and to me, one of the absolute best films of the year, right there at the top, with a lot of films that aren't even in this top 20. So, yeah, but for me, as far as favourites, I'd put it at number 18. Number 17, a complete change of pace from BlacKkKlansman, we have Pixar's Coco. And it's worth noting as well, I go entirely off of European/UK release dates. So that's why this is in here, because I believe it was a 2017 film that was released in 2017 in America, which is where it really counts. But this film, beautiful, absolutely stunning. I mean, the animation and the colors, the vibrancy of this film is, you know, almost unto itself worthy of calling it a great film. But it has really lovable characters and a really, really damn good story that is drawn, and I don't mean physically drawn, even though it is drawn very well, but or animated well on a computer, but the story is drawn so brilliantly. I mean, you look at it from A to B to C. It's a typical story. I mean, there are twists in this film that we've seen before 100 times in other films, but I think that it was done really, really well. And, you know, Pixar, they're fantastic at telling stories, first and foremost, and then the animation and the visual wonder just comes hand in hand with that. But the music is a key part of me loving this film. I think it's a beautiful celebration of that kind of that Mexican style of guitar playing and singing, and just a huge cultural celebration of Mexican people, which was great to see. Just a difference, you know. To me, I look at Black Panther, it's just great to see a different vibe, you know, in a film like this. And it's the same with Coco, where the emotion is really stirring about this young boy who goes into the land of the dead, and I'm hugely interested and intrigued by death, and have been my entire life. So I'm always going to be drawn to films that are about death, and this film is about death in its own way. It's obviously a kind of fun, bouncy kids film, but also it has a few really heavy moments. And I love the song Remember Me, because when you first hear it, it's a great song. And when you find out more about that song, it takes on a completely different meaning. And when you watch the film a second time and you see it played for the first time, you realize what a fallacy that song is the first time it's being sung, and how beautiful and pure it is the last time it is sung. Just great storytelling. If you can go to a film again and things make even more sense and the bigger picture is even more complete, then that's when you've made a great film. Number 16, Us and Them. This is a Chinese film that was released on Netflix, directed by Rene Liu. And actually, when I think about it, there are at least 3 films in this top 20 list directed by women, which isn't a choice that I made actively. And I'm sure if you went back a few years and tried to find female directors in my top 20 list, there wouldn't be many, if any, which just goes to show you that things are shifting, and that's pretty cool. But regardless of that, the film itself is a romance set in China, obviously, about this young couple who form over a couple of years. They first meet on New Year's Eve on a train, and we follow them throughout various New Year's Eves as the years go on, as their friendship develops, as their love for each other begins to manifest itself, and they become a couple. And we cut from that kind of first couple of years of their relationship to the present day. So I think that the kind of the past timeline is set in like 2003, 2004, and they get some of those details really right, like the computer wallpapers in the background, the style of phones and things like that. It's kind of a period piece in a very subtle way because it's not too far removed from our current society, but there are these little changes in technology which they got bang on. And the current timeline, I think, is 2017 or maybe even 2018, where we follow the same two characters meeting on a plane. And this is set in black and white. It's shot in black and white. And we realize that they have been apart for a very long time. So we begin to learn why they split apart, why they separated, and why things are so tense between them when they meet each other again. And the way those two timelines play with each other and go back and forth is just so expertly done. And, you know, hey, this is my top 20 of the year. I'm going to be using terms like expertly done a lot, but it really was woven together just seamlessly, and in a way that in both timelines I was like, what's going to happen? Like, you know, what's going to set this off between the two? What's going to happen between the two now? Like, I was just at both ends of the spectrum. I was so invested in both stories, and two great performances. I just completely bought their chemistry and love for each other, and an incredibly emotional film as well. And I have a lot of thoughts about it, which I expand upon in my full review, which you'll see for Asian Cinema Season 2. Number 15, Mortal Engines. Yeah. So, when I watched this film, directed by Christian Rivers and produced by Peter Jackson, for the first time in December of 2018, it hit my number one. My favorite film of the year. Full disclosure. Was that me going along with the hype? No, because there was no hype around this fucking movie. No one was talking about it, and if they were like, oh, terrible, oh, bomb, oh, it lost so much money. Like, that somehow matters to a film's quality. Well, it's no Lord of the Rings, you know. Well, Peter Jackson was behind it, but it's, you know. And I know people did go and see it and enjoyed it, but it was a colossal failure. And I watched it, and I sat there in that cinema for 2 hours, and I was thrilled and visually pleased and invested and moved for the entirety of the duration. I loved every single moment of this film. I loved the world building. I loved all the practical sets, the way that it integrated certain parts of. I mean, it's a dystopian kind of film set way into the future where we have these cities on wheels. But little bits like the intricacies of London, which has become this huge predator city, which roams the land on huge wheels, and we go inside the bowels of the city, and you see bits of like the London Underground that has been preserved and placed inside this. It's just an incredible world. But I love the characters as well, and I think most people have kind of said, yeah, the world building's cool and it looks great, but the characters and the cheesiness, I don't know what it is, but it feels like in the past couple of months with Alita Battle Angel that kind of 90s cheesiness in action movies is kind of coming back in a way that I really enjoy. Yes, there are cheesy moments in Mortal Engines in terms of the one-liners, but I really enjoyed it, and that just kind of, it reminded me of the films I loved growing up. And it's fun, you know, you don't have to take everything so seriously. Oh, well, that wasn't an Oscar-worthy line. Like, I just was so taken with this, and I love the visuals, and I love the character of Shrike. I even loved the main character. I thought she was a really interesting and cool character who had this kind of dark and twisted history and trying to find her own place, which is what, you know, a lot of these stereotypical hero characters have. But every character I really enjoyed, and some more than others, obviously, but it led to a big kind of showdown finale that I thought was great, and kind of, you know, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I only put it at 15 because I really feel like maybe I was just blinded by the wow factor. And I want to watch it again. And I suspect that after I do watch it again, this will change in my list. But I don't see it leaving my top 20. I almost feel like just because everyone else thinks it's so average, then it must have just been a really good day for me when I watched it. But I'm going to watch it again before I do the list, and you will see if I change its placing once I do that, so look forward to that. Number 14, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Where did this film come from? The trailers came out, I thought, it looks alright. The film came out, everyone was buzzing over it, amazing. I'm like, really, again, is this like the Lego movie all over again, where, yeah, it's really good, but it's not amazing? No, this is amazing. This is the amazing Spider-Man. This is, and I love how people, they immediately jump to, this is the best Spider-Man movie, bar none. And they're not, they're not too far from the truth. But regardless of all of that, it is a phenomenal superhero film. Like it takes something that is so worn and well worn, I should say. I enjoy superhero movies. I don't have the fatigue that a lot of people have. I enjoy them. Yes, it's the same kind of template every time, but it's about how you color that template in, how you do it in a different way. But obviously, the core ingredients and blueprint of those stories are largely the same. And here we have an origin story that's a little bit different, where we follow a kid who goes into different, multiverses, or at least experiences characters from different multiverses. And we have like Spider-Man Noir, voiced by Nick Cage, and just the wacky weirdness of all of that. To me, I thought was going to make for quite a bit of a mess as far as like all our main characters are concerned, but it is so cohesive and radical, and the way that the animation is done is unlike anything we've ever seen before. Visually, the film is stunning, and in a way that I've never seen before, a way that none of us have seen before. They literally have revolutionized a form of telling a story in animated form. And it does have a weird kind of jerkiness to it. It does have a weird kind of, some of the bits look a bit like 3D that's not finished, or that you're not looking at it properly without the glasses, but it has its own vibe and flavor, and even the end credits were like masterful. I was sat there watching the end credits like, this is awesome. This is comic book art. Fantastic film. Number 13, Roma, Alfonso Cuarón's recent film that hit Netflix. Unfortunately, I really wish I'd seen this in the cinema. Holy shit, I wish I'd seen this film in a cinema, but it wasn't to be. This is the talk of the town, I guess. It's up for all the awards, it's winning all the awards, and rightfully so. I think this is one of the best films of the year, along with Klansman. It is a stunning film from start to finish. I think Alfonso Cuarón is unreasonably talented. This guy, I think he wrote the film, but regardless, directed and shot the film himself. He was the cinematographer as well as the director. And the framing alone. And I was talking about this scene in a recent stream with Brian Lomax and CP, and I was saying how the opening credits of Roma are shot against essentially just a concrete floor, and you're just seeing the lines of the tiles, and the way that it's framed and composed is just like so aesthetically pleasing, and the water slowly washing, and the sound design, and how like that alone was like just brilliant to me. And they're kind of like snickering at me like, oh god, look at him, he's the film snob. I fully stand by it. There's something about the way that Cuarón lensed this film, and whatever different lenses he used, and the way that he framed it, composed it. Every image is just, and the black and white helps so much, the widescreen image. It's just a beautiful film to look at. But it also tells a story that doesn't get told very much, which is of a maid in a kind of middle class family, and her perspective. And we often see those characters on the sidelines, and they're not really an important part of the story. She is the story, and she's a maid who gets pregnant and feels like she's going to lose her job, but she gets embraced by the mother of the family, who kind of employs her, and very much she is a part of the family, even though they pay her to kind of live there and do all the housework and stuff. And there's something endearing about that, even if set in the 70s, you are looking at a different kind of society, but just the human element of those characters' relationships, and the scene on the beach at the end, like holy shit. Hell, the scene in the hospital is, I think, one of the most traumatic things I've ever experienced in a film, and it's just a beautiful story, and so memorable from all different, from the acting to the visuals, and phenomenal film, one of the best of the year, and had to be in my top 20. Number 12, The Other Side of the Wind, directed by Orson Welles. This is a film that was going into principal photography almost 50 years ago, and it came out a few months ago on Netflix. And I could talk for a very long time about this movie. It's a film that Orson Welles started to make. It was his last film, and it never got finished. And he filmed it all, for the most part, for like 95%, to very loosely round up. And over the years, he tried to complete it. He edited around 45 minutes of it, and then he died. And there's a huge and documented kind of series of events in which people have tried to get the footage and put the film back together. It never came through until very recently. Frank Marshall, I know, was very instrumental in getting this film put back together again. Peter Bogdanovich, who appears in the film, actually, he acts as one of the main characters. And eventually the film got finished and funded by Netflix and released. And it's about a director. It's about Hannaford, who is played by John Huston, who, for my money, gives one of the best performances of 2018, even though it was shot 45 years ago. Incredible performance. Wow, what a powerhouse of acting right there. And I feel very much that Hannaford is almost an analog for Orson himself, and it's almost maybe like the way he saw himself as a director, as almost a dictator, and as a powerful, charismatic presence. He turns up at the party, everyone is there like to get a piece of him, and it feels autobiographical in that sense, and also it feels very prophetic in that sense, because in the film, and this is no spoiler, the movie opens with the knowledge that Hannaford dies in a car crash. He's making his film called The Other Side of the Wind, and he's having trouble finishing it. And he dies before it's finished. Ring any bells? It's almost like Orson Welles planned this. It's almost like he purposefully didn't finish the film and waited until he died, knowing that at some point someone would put it together because it was Orson Welles' last film, and he would achieve a full circle meta, and the only kind of flaw in that is that it was released on Netflix, To see this film on the big screen would be amazing, because it is film. This movie is film. And it's shot in, gorgeous widescreen color for the actual film within the film. And then the actual portions are done in 16mm color in black and white. The editing style is frenetic and vibrant and out of control at times. And they actually based the editing on this film on the 45 minutes that he'd already edited himself. So it's not like he filmed all of this and then someone took the footage and tried to kind of introduce a style of cutting. This is very much based on what he was already trying to achieve in a way that for the early 70s was fucking radical. The way this film was put together, and you can debate whether it is a true Orson Welles film or not because of that, but I thought this was a phenomenal experience and a great story, and I was just captivated by this party and all the people there. Lots of great performances, all anchored by John Huston, just doing an incredible job. They had his son Danny Huston come in to do some ADR for his father's lines and some of the bits of audio that weren't completely in good shape. So this is such a unique film, and I don't know why it isn't being celebrated as such. I think it isn't getting great reviews and people don't love it, but I was all in on this film. I thought it was awesome. I'll be watching it again and again. Fantastic film. Number 11, Tully, directed by Jason Reitman. And this is a film that has gotten just okay kind of thoughts and reviews and opinions from people, including people I know and whose opinions I respect and like to hear from. So I think I'm really alone in loving this film and thinking that it's a great film. And again, it gets into personal preference. The Other Side of the Wind, Roma, Black Klansman, so much better as a film than Tully. But I didn't sit through the credits of Roma and The Other Side of the Wind kind of just really thinking and feeling. Perhaps in Black Klansman I did. I mean, that film really rattled me at the end, but that's a more of a powerful kind of in-your-face, feel this, Tully was just more of this kind of melancholic, kind of introspective emotion that I got at the end. I sat through the entire credits just kind of really moved and touched by it. And it's a film that I don't want to speak too much about, and I think other people have said that, but Charlize Theron gives one of the great performances of the year, because it's that's the thing, I get more drawn into and impressed by the performances that aren't really, they're not playing for the back row, it's a really honest and subtle and wholly believable performance of this woman who is a mother, and I think she gives birth. I think she gives birth to another child. So she's a new mother, but she already has another kid, and she's dealing with the struggles of that and the stresses of that. And then they hire a night nanny who comes in to kind of look after the kids overnight, and then, or particularly the newborn child. And so she has time to kind of actually sleep and get some rest. And this character, Tully, is played by Mackenzie Davis, who gives another great performance. Like, she is so luminous in the film, and as the film progresses, her role gets even more special to the overall story. And it's funny, but again, just a really warm movie. And it goes to some places which are quite, sad and dramatic, but the main thing I think about is scenes between Charlize Theron and Mackenzie Davis in the kind of warm glow of her living room in the late hours of the night, and a character who really needs some help in her life and receives it, and that's really nice. And by the end, I think it was just really touching, and I thought this film was fantastic, and it was actually originally in my top 5, but I think just based on the strength of some of the other films, I put it just outside the top 10. So yeah, but otherwise I thought it was fantastic. Number 10, moving into the top 10 now, we have Wildlife. Directed by Paul Dano, who's a great actor in his own right, and written by himself and his partner, I believe, Zoe Kazan. Based on a novel, I believe. Whew. This film, I probably wouldn't even put it in the top 20 best films of the year, but it really resonated with me. And I've reviewed it, I've talked about it, how this is the first film that really made me cry in my life. I've been moved by hundreds and hundreds of films. I've been choked up at hundreds of films. I've welled up over thousands of films probably, and I've let tears roll over a couple of dozen films. But I've never actually sobbed a little bit, just a little bit at the end of a film. And with Wildlife I did, and it was for a very specific personal reason. But I think that it is such a expertly done movie. But every performance from the main cast is just flawless, in my opinion. I forget the actor's name who plays the teenage son of our main family of characters, and I want to try and find it now because he needs to be credited, because I think it's one of the best performances of the past few years, let alone 2018. Ed Oxenbould. He plays a young boy. Who is a young boy, he's a teenager, 14, 15, and his father, Jerry, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, has moved the family to a new place. It's 1960s America, and they moved to Montana, I believe, and he loses his job, and he refuses to get a job that he thinks is for teenagers, meaning packing groceries. So he holds out until he volunteers to actually go and fight the wildfires in the local mountains. His wife, Jeanette, played by Carey Mulligan, is incensed at this. She thinks he's abandoning them and is taking too much of a risk to his personal kind of, not health, but, the risk of going out there to fight the fires is, irresponsible, she feels. So the most part of the movie is dealing with Jeanette and her son, and them living as, a family without the father, without the man of the family around. And she really struggles. So does the son. And I can kind of relate to that, as having grown up with my mum as a single parent for, I wouldn't say a majority of my childhood, but for, a good chunk of it. And so I related to that aspect of it. But the performances and the way that these characters are written and fleshed out, and everything is said through the eyes and the performances without really needing to explain anything, or there are moments where the characters talk, but obviously it's a film, but there are moments where the characters talk about their feelings in certain situations, but it's all about the things left unsaid that you can read on their faces, like it's been drawn beautifully. Like you tell exactly what's going on. And I was just so gripped, so captivated, and I felt so much. Not just for this boy who was struggling, not just for this mother who was just completely on a downward descent and spiraling out of control, but I felt for the father too. I felt for Jake Gyllenhaal's character, and maybe he didn't do the right thing. Maybe she didn't do the right thing. The only innocent party here really is the son. And, again, he's mostly just looking and reacting at things, but I thought the performance was one of the most believable things I've seen in a film in many, many years. I didn't feel like I was watching acting for a single second. I felt like I was watching an actual person going through something, and I was experiencing it in this really raw, first-hand way. I suppose you could say second-hand, I'm watching it in a film, but regardless, I felt like it was first-hand. I felt like I was there, and that I was seeing the struggles he was going through. And there are flawed characters in the film, and it brings us to a finale that doesn't really offer much of a specific conclusion to the story, but it's enough of a touching moment to kind of, I don't know, take us to a point where we really think about things. We think about the relationships we have with our parents, and the struggles that parents can go through sometimes. And, I just think it's a fantastic film. And I'm saying that a lot, a fantastic film. So I'll try and think of a better word to end these little segments on instead of it was fantastic. But it was fantastic. Number 9, A Quiet Place. This is where we get into some of the more popular ones, I think. Directed by John Krasinski, of all people, who, certainly is turning heads and doing things that people weren't quite expecting from him, both in the acting department and in the directing of a movie department. Also starring himself and his wife, Emily Blunt, as two parents who have a number of children and are living in a world in which there are monsters out there who will hunt you down and kill you viciously if they hear even the slightest sound. So they've grown accustomed to living their life without sound, and they live on a farm, and they go through this experience in which they are challenged mortally by the threat of these alien creatures. And from the get-go, it's an incredible film. Like the sound design, the lack of sound design when they drop the sound out, specifically in the way that the character of their daughter, who is deaf, when we go to her perspective, the sound drops out completely, and we get that kind of feeling. And it's a great kind of a way to play around with that concept of sound, having a character who can't hear anything and who has to communicate through the visual of sign language and so on and so forth. And it's a film that has hardly any dialogue, and I fucking love that. I'm a huge fan of silent films and silent cinema and movies that try to tell their story without having too much dialogue. And this film has maybe 8-9 lines of dialogue, probably something like that. There's a number of things that mother says to her children, and there is a scene between John Krasinski and his son near a waterfall where he's like, "Hey, we can speak now because the sound masks this." So there are a few moments of dialogue, but they're few and far between, and it is an absolute masterclass of tension. Holy shit. This is an incredible thriller, and I've seen it twice, and both times the people in the cinema were absolute kind of unreasonable and irritating and disrespectful twats. But regardless, despite all of that distraction where you're supposed to be focused on the silence and people are just like eating meals and nachos and fucking slurping their drinks, I still was utterly taken with the film, and it was a complete thrill ride. And I can't wait to watch it at home with like probably noise cancelling headphones. I think I said that before. So, and I think I'm going to enjoy it even more. But I think it's an incredible film. And particular shout out to Emily Blunt's performance, because it is incredible, especially that bathtub scene. Like, that's just like, how do you not believe that? Like, I feel like she was pregnant, gave birth in that scene, because it was just ridiculous how much she committed to that segment of the film. But yeah, Quiet Place was a phenomenal film. Number 8, speaking of thrill ride, Mission Impossible Fallout, which gets my pick for the action movie of the decade. When I saw Rogue Nation, the previous Mission Impossible film, I said that's one of the best action films made in the past 20 years. When I saw Fallout, I thought, it's even better than Rogue Nation. Like, I couldn't believe how this film just doesn't let up. It is action sequence after action sequence after action sequence, but it has the moments in between where the story builds and grows and just leads to this finale where everything converges and the excitement is at its absolute peak. And it's all framed around about 4 or 5 action set pieces, any of which could be used to kind of build an entire action movie around, and it would be a really damn good action movie. It's just one of the finest pieces of action cinema of all time, bar none. I firmly will die on that hill. I think Tom Cruise is like he's the modern day Jackie Chan, Buster Keaton. Will put his body on the line, and you can talk about his personal life, whatever. He is an incredible entertainer and performer with so much dedication and grit, and makes these films so much better by him doing these ridiculous stunts. And I do feel like I mean, they just announced 7 and 8 are going to be kind of released back to back in a few years, and I genuinely feel like there's a good chance he might die. Like, I'm not even kidding. You see the special features on the Blu-ray for this film. I didn't realize how much of that flying in the helicopters he actually did towards the end, like going through like the crevices of the mountains. Like, it's unbelievable. And but beyond that, it has the story that really works. And I mean, one of my favorite moments of the film is simply the scene in the hospital where they have this bad guy who has this information they really need, and they trick him into believing that this nuclear bomb has gone off, and that a city has been decimated. They create this whole set to trick him into giving them what they want. And when they reveal it and they pull out like kind of the set of where he's in, I mean, it's an amazing scene. There's no action in it, but those moments are just as good as some of the action scenes. So it isn't a film that purely and wholly relies on the action to drive everything. It has a really good story, and I loved bringing the villain back from Rogue Nation because I thought he was such a great villain, and he gets to grow even more in this one, and does a kind of a different, approaches it from a different angle. And so, yeah, for me, one of the best action films I've ever seen, and for sure had to be in the top 10. Number 7, Game Night. One of the best comedies of the past 20 years. Like, I feel like Mission Impossible just set a huge high bar for action movies. And that's another one where a lot of stuff was done practically as well. Not to keep on about Mission Impossible, but huge high bar for action movies. And now I think Game Night for me has set a high bar for the modern American comedy movie, which there've been many good ones and many funny ones, but I think it's, for me, it's a future classic. I love everything about it. Went to see it at a preview screening, had one of the great cinema experiences of the past 10 years for me. So much fun, everyone laughing, like absolutely just in hysterics. It's a really, really well written movie. The jokes are great. The characters are lovable and entertaining and different, and I love all the characters in the film. You have the two main characters in Jason Bateman and Rachel McAdams, who are both hilarious in the film as this couple who are really big into games like board games and kind of Pictionary and all that kind of quizzes. And they're hyper competitive. That's why they kind of fell for each other. And they host a game night every week. And then Jason Bateman's brother comes in, Carl Chandler, who's just great as well. So kind of charming, and kind of in a way you want to kind of give him a bit of a slap. He's a bit of a dick, but you kind of like him anyway. And then all their friends get together for a special game night in which things go oh so horribly wrong. But it is just it's almost like an adventure movie, and just some of the best gags I've seen in so long. And man, I would say there's not a bum note in the whole film. There's a couple, maybe just a couple, but apart from that, and he's even doing interesting things with the way that it's shot. Some of those driving scenes where the camera's kind of mounted on the same kind of track as where the car is going, which is really cool and different. The tilt shift photography, which just made everything look like an actual board game, even though it's real, actual locations. And not overused and not too gimmicky, and then just really funny performances. And what more can I say? For a while it was my number one of the year until I saw a lot better films. But again, another one that couldn't be outside of my top 10, and it's one I've seen I think 3 times now, and it's just such a blast to go back to it. So it really holds up, and it's a great comedy. Number 6, and this is another film that when I first saw it, it shot right to my number 1 of the year. That's how much I loved this film. The more I'm removed from it, the more I kind of calm down a bit on it. But I will revisit it before I do my my final list, and I think it might go up a couple of spots. Shirkers. This is a Netflix documentary, and I think actually there's quite a few films in this top 20 that are on Netflix. So if you haven't seen them, no excuses. Which is pretty cool, actually. I really feel like Netflix, for all the kind of people talking about, well, it's killing the movie industry. Well, it's doing a lot for the movie industry as well. To have stories like this financed and told, I think, is fantastic. And this came out of nowhere. I think Edgar Wright was tweeting about it, and so I was intrigued by his kind of summary of the film. So I checked it out. Was blown away by it. What a film, what a story. This is directed by a woman called Sandy Tan, who in, I think, the early 1990s, when she was 18, 19 herself, a young teen, or late teen, I suppose you would say. Regardless, very young. She was obsessed with movies and wanted to make her own movie. She wrote her own movie, a feature-length script, and got a friend of hers, an older man, to direct it and to get like the kind of the film stock and the cameras and everything, and they made this movie in Singapore, this independent film, a road movie, which is kind of, a lot of people find that funny because Singapore isn't a very big place and you can drive across it in like, I guess like half an hour or something. But regardless, they made this road movie, and by all accounts, it was this very kind of interesting film that could have really made some waves and been a hit at like the film festivals and gotten some buzz, and might have been a part of that big kind of wave of independent movies in the 1990s. But when they finished filming it, the man who had directed it for them, George, took all the footage and said, okay, I'm going to go edit this and I'll let you know when it's done and we can start sending it off to Cannes and stuff like that. And they never saw him again. Gone. Vanished. Along with the movie that they spent their whole summer on. And all their hopes and dreams completely stolen by this man. And why? Who knows? That's what this film is. 20 years after the fact, Sandy was actually contacted by his former wife, who said, hey, he's passed away, and I have all these film cans if you want them. He had kept the film, Shirkers, that was also the name of the film they made, and he kept it in perfect, pristine condition. Air-conditioned, everywhere he moved, he brought those film cans and kept them in just the best condition possible. Why? So Sandy now attempts to try and find out why, while showing us the film, while talking about her young life in Singapore, about her relationship with George, this mysterious figure, and other people's experiences and stories about George and the odd things that he would do. And we get to see all the footage from the film that she made, and we get to see her almost like Three Identical Strangers, detective story style, going into why he did this to them. Why he took that from them, why he stole all this creativity that they had poured out and kept it for himself and wouldn't let anyone else see it for apparently no reason. This gets explored in the film, but in making this documentary, in telling this story so masterfully, Sandy Tan is now reclaimed, I think, her ability to call herself a filmmaker and a storyteller in the visual medium. After the making of Shirkers, I don't believe that she made a film I think she made a short film and dabbled, I think, in recent years, but she turned to writing a novel, actually, and tried to kind of vanquish her demons a little bit with that. But in this film, Shirkers, she resurrects her film from the dead in a completely different way and repurposes that footage to tell the story of the making of the film, which may be even more interesting than the film itself. And it's about this kind of what-if scenario, and it's this horrible story of this trauma that these women went through when they made this film, and this man took it from them. But it is also this celebration of these young women who wanted to make a movie and made it, and there's something so inspiring about that, taking away what happened when the film was taken from them. And it just works on and operates on so many different levels, and I think it's one of the great films that is about films and a love of cinema. And even though it has that dark edge with this guy who did this really awful thing, there is this gleaming light at the end of the tunnel for Shirkers that leaves a lot of mixed emotions, but ultimately I think is just an incredibly interesting and captivating and inspiring story. Number 5, Cold War. This is a film by Polish filmmaker Paweł Pawlikowski, and his previous film, Ida, was one of my favorites of 2014, an absolute masterpiece. And this film just completely follows suit with that. It is, again, I would say one of the best films of the year, along with Roma, Black Klansman. Stunning movie. The cinematography is second to none. I think that this is one of the best looking films I've ever seen. Shot in 4:3, black and white. Every image, every frame looks like an old photograph. It's just beautifully captured, framed, composed, and it is such a compact story. It's It's set in Poland, and it's set around Europe, and follows this couple over the course of many years. In fact, you call them a couple, they're not really. They're these two characters who come from completely different worlds, who fall in love with each other, fall in passionate love with each other, but can never quite stay together. The circumstances of their country, the circumstances of the world and Europe, and their positions in life always get in the way, and we follow them over many, many years. And every time they reunite, it's this electric kind of moment, and I was so gripped by their story, and often those romances that they never quite kind of lock into each other. They never quite get the peace that they might deserve together. There's always something in the way. Stories like that always, I think, for me, are really, like, you keep rooting for the characters to finally figure it out and to find a way to be together. And the way that it's painted against this backdrop of Poland and all of these other countries and locations in Paris, it's an awesome film. Like, I just thought, what an epic tale told in an hour and 20 minutes. It feels like a 3-hour movie. I could have watched it for another 3 hours. And the music, because it's very much based in music. She's a singer, and he is a kind of musical director in a way. And it goes into kind of the politics of that time, but really you strip all that away, and it is this streamlined, heartbreaking romance story, which was so appealing to me, and they're both fantastic. And I think it's just an incredible film. That's all there is to it. Number 4, Leave No Trace, directed by Deborah Granick. And this is a film that to me pales in comparison to something like Cold War, on almost every level, but I liked it just a little bit more. And it was one of those great experiences in the cinema where I'd heard a little bit about it, and it's a film I wouldn't ordinarily go to the cinema to see, especially with Connie, because we usually go for like the blockbuster kind of crowd-pleasing movies. This was a little bit more different, a little bit more introspective, and a little bit more quiet and subtle and moving. And it's about a father and his teenage daughter living in a state park off the grid. And he is a former veteran. He was in the service and is dealing with post-traumatic stress. But it's never kind of highlighted in a way where, like, at some point in the movie they're like, well, I think the problem is the post-traumatic stress syndrome, because back in the war he did this and he did that. They never explain it, but it's there, and it's palpable that it is such a part of his life in a really heartbreaking way, and he can't let go of that, and it's become part of him. And so it speaks to that kind of issue within society of the soldiers who come back and are never the same. And it speaks very much to the idea of not doing things the way that society says you should in terms of raising your child, or the way you should live your life. They seem to get on perfectly well living in the woods, and I enjoy films that kind of touch on that idea. Captain Fantastic was one of those, even though they're two very different films. Ben Foster is brilliant as the father, and Thomasin McKenzie is, again, one of my favorite performances, I think, of the year, playing the daughter. And what I loved about the film was I never knew where it was going to end. I never knew where it was going to next, because they're in the state park, and I thought, oh, it's going to be a film where it's just them living in the wilderness, and we're going to follow that in a very natural kind of fly on the wall way, or fly on the leaf way. And then they kind of get seen, and they get taken into kind of, the government's kind of care, and I think, okay, it's going to be about them kind of being separated from each other and the great injustice of that. No, they put them back together again, and they send them off to live somewhere where they're given a home and a house and shelter and a job, and she goes to school. I think, okay, it's going to be a film about them adjusting to the real modern life. And then they decide to leave, and it's like, where is this going? I love it, and I was so just on board with everything, and it was a really touching finale, and I think one of the best films of the year as well, that is getting talked about but should be talked about even more. Number 3, Isle of Dogs. This was my number 1 for a very long time, and I almost feel bad because I really want like a Wes Anderson film to be my number 1 of the year, but it never seems to quite happen, at least not in recent years anyway. But what a movie. I've seen it multiple times. I get something more of it every time. There's all these little details that you miss. I think it's a technical wonder. I think that the cinematography, the the scale of the puppets and the way the stop motion animation is used to tell the story, and it kind of expands upon what I loved about the visuals of Fantastic Mr. Fox, where you have characters with fur, the fur that's always moving, and it can kind of bristle to kind of show the emotions at times, but it's such a dynamic looking way to make a film. I just love it. And obviously with the dogs, all the characters are dogs, and so the hair's always moving. Well, not all the characters, there are human characters, but the majority, the lion's share of the story takes place with these dog characters. Phenomenal voice cast. I mean, Bryan Cranston, I think, is amazing. Like his vocal performance is so weighty. You know, it lends so much gravitas to his character, who is essentially the main character of the film. And we follow the young boy Atari, who comes over to the trash island where all the dogs have been sectioned off because the city is like, no, we're done with dogs. They kind of carry too much diseases, and there's that whole kind of political subplot, which I think was really interesting. And every time we were away from it, I was looking forward to getting back to the island and seeing where that adventure was going. In that sense, it's almost like a road movie where they're trying to get across the island to kind of achieve the goal of getting Atari back to his lost dog, who he thinks and hopes might be on the island. And there are kind of revelations and so on, but it's peppered with all the Wes Anderson kind of humor. It's a love letter to Japanese culture, though I will say, in now having a good friend who's Japanese, he is not too keen on the way that Japanese culture is presented in the film, which is a real shame to hear, and obviously something that I have no frame of reference for, and maybe I need to discuss that with him further. But for me, it just seemed to celebrate the Japanese culture, and clearly Wes Anderson is a fan of Japanese movies, and to hear the kind of Seven Samurai theme piped in there, I'll leave that one in for free, was great. The music is fantastic. The kind of that kind of drum section at the beginning, and emotional too. They just the one of my favorite parts of the film is when we see Atari with the dog that he's trying to find throughout the entire movie. When he first meets that dog, he's in the hospital. He's been in a train crash. He lost his parents, and there's a dog there with a kind of headpiece who can speak to him. And Atari, out of the corner of his mouth, is saying, like, you know, can you hear me? Or he's saying something, and the dog with the headpiece is like, yes, I can hear you. I can hear you. I can hear you. And just in repeating those words, he's trying to say it's going to be all right. Like it's like he's saying the same thing, but he's meaning something different each time he says it, and the emotion is coming through. And maybe Wes overused the gimmick where the tears would kind of build up around the dog's eyes, but it was so, I mean, it just knocked me dead the first time I saw that scene. I just thought, wow, what a power in saying the same thing over and over again, and the tone means something a little bit more different and a little bit more complex each time. Wonderful.
I can hear you. I can hear you. I can hear you.
Number 2, Won't You Be My Neighbor? Another documentary. I watched this a few days ago and it jumped right in there, and I don't know where it came from. I saw the trailer and I had no real knowledge of Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, and I was like, seems a bit kind of too sickly sweet for me. You know, it seems a bit kind of almost creepy. You know, this guy who did the children's show, and he's like, I like you just the way you are, and it's just like, it's a bit, you know, not for me that. Everyone's talking about this one. Oh my god, everyone's raving about it. I thought, I want to see it now. And I saw this clip from the film where he spoke in front of Congress, I believe, because they were going to cut funding to the public television or something to that effect. And he made this impassioned speech. And it's just one of the most gripping things I've seen in a long time. And I thought, okay, I'm going to watch this movie. Wow. Tears. Like, there was something so moving about this guy who was so steadfastly earnest in everything he did, and was just, you know, the way it comes across at least, was so pure in his convictions of teaching and educating children in a way that makes them reflect positively on themselves and to think a lot of themselves. And what can I say? I feel like it's a 90-minute film that sums up the essence of a man's entire life in a really profound way. And I was completely on board. And I knew nothing about him. And there are people out there who've grown up with Mr. Rogers and that show. And I can only imagine the emotional experience it must be to see this film and to have him celebrated in such a beautifully done way. You know, we obviously have interviews with people who knew him and worked with him. He passed away many years ago, but it follows his career and doing that show and all the things that he did and all the things that he was such an advocate for. And one of the things that really, really touched me was when he would, later on in life, he would talk, give speeches and things and say, you know, we need to remember the people who made us who we are more. So, you know, I just like to take a minute or 10 seconds to just stop and think about those people. So I will now, in the spirit of Mr. Rogers, do that to you watching this video now. Let's take 10 seconds, all of us, to think about the people who made us who we are, the people who supported us, encouraged us when we were growing up, and the people who, if we were to think of them in that way, would feel very nice that we thought of them in that way. So here we go. And it might seem cheesy or again like I was saying, too sickly sweet, but it's nice to do that from time to time, and he reminded me of that in his words that were conveyed through this documentary and this movie, which was wonderfully done and made me want to be a better person. How can you really argue with a film like that? And it isn't hugely impressive on a technical level, like something like The Other Side of the Wind, or Roma, or Black Klansman, or Isle of Dogs with the cinematography and the way that stuff. Like, there's so much like incredible artistry, and there is an artistry to editing and putting together a documentary, and they did a fantastic job. But that isn't really the point. Really, it's the message that he kind of radiated as a person, and they just did a wonderful job putting that together. So technically speaking, is it one of the best films of the year? Not at all. But sometimes it doesn't need to be a great film, and sometimes it doesn't need to be an important film either. And so maybe I would put it in the best like top 20 films of the year, because I do recognize that sometimes the content of the story can override the kind of technical merits of a film. And maybe I'm just talking complete bollocks there, but that's the way I feel about it, and I highly recommend you check it out for yourselves. Which brings us to my favorite film of the year, which has been chopped and changed countless times over the past year or so. My favorite film of 2018 is Disobedience, directed by Sebastian Lelio and starring Rachel Weisz and Rachel McAdams. And when I first watched this, it didn't jump straight to my number one, like many others that I thought might stay in that number one spot. And as I talk, I'm trying to find out the name of the lead actor in the film as well, because he certainly deserves a credit. Alessandro Nivola, who plays David. So this is a story, and I might make a separate review of this film, but this is a story about a woman who learns that her father, a rabbi, has passed away, and she lives in New York as a photographer, so she returns home to London to pay her respects and attend the funeral. And this character is played by Rachel Weisz, Ronit. And Ronit comes home to meet David, not David, and, you know, to kind of, because David was the man who essentially became a surrogate son to her father. And she was estranged with her father for a reason that becomes clear as the movie goes along, and estranged a little bit from the Jewish community in London that her father was such a key figurehead of. And she also meets for the first time in a very long time Esty, played by Rachel McAdams, who was her childhood friend, along with David. The three of them formed somewhat of a trio. And she is floored to find that in the time since she'd been away, that David and Esty have married. And it's no real surprise that there's something going on between Esty and Ronit, and that there is a romance there. But I had no idea how that was going to manifest itself until I saw the film. And I can't wait to see this again, because I feel like it's going to be a completely different movie, because there's such a loaded tension in that first 30 minutes that's based on, you know, the background that we're going to learn as the movie progresses, and that these two were in love with each other when they were younger, and because of the community that they were born into, it was not accepted, and they were disobeying to enable themselves into this relationship, and as a result, Ronit left. And David, who, you know, such a great character, because at a certain point in the film, he becomes the person who is stopping them from being together. And in that sense, you're rooting for them to be together, and you don't like him for that. But he comes from a place that you can understand. And ultimately, I think the whole film hinges on what he decides to do at the end. And I just, again, cried at the end. You know, I thought there was like, I could have hit the fucking roof when this film ended, because it was so, it gave me everything I wanted, absolutely everything I wanted. And there was a moment in the film where I was like, oh no, I was so like stressed out about a particular character, and I just was this, my stomach dropped, right? I just was like, fuck no. And then it carried on, and I'm like, oh my god, like, what? How is this going to end? Like, I really want this to end nicely for everyone involved, not just for Ronit and Esty. And so, as a result, I think it's great because it doesn't just make you invested in these two characters and their romance, but it makes you invested in the third party, in a sense, the third wheel in David. Even though you could view Ronit as the third wheel, as she enters the movie and the story as this outsider. And it deals with the theme of people who are in these communities where they aren't allowed to be who they are, and how that isn't the right thing. It really isn't. No two ways about it. And there is a sex scene between Rachel McAdams and Rachel Weisz, and I'm kind of smiling because I read a review on Letterboxd, which is fantastic. It's this 2-sentence review, and it read, Rachel McAdams was paid money to have Rachel Weisz spit in her mouth. Iconic. And it's like, yeah, she did. She was paid money to have Rachel Weisz spit in her mouth, which sounds very crass. But it was, for me, everything that Blue is the Warmest Color could have been, if it wasn't, 7 minutes of borderline softcore pornography. And I love Blue is the Warmest Color, but that scene is way over the top. It conveys something, but it does something in a way that is just too much for me. When actresses have to wear prosthetic vaginas when they're doing a sex scene, you're probably going a little bit too far. This was an incredible sex scene in the sense that it's very passionate and intimate and, in a sense, graphic. But there's no nudity. It isn't going extreme. It conveys that real lust, and then afterwards the love and the romance, but in a way that I just thought was totally appropriate. And I just thought, why couldn't have Blue is the Warmest Color been like that? But hey, they're different movies. But it's a case where it was a very intense sex scene that I thought was done so like pitch perfect. I think like it really conveyed what is supposed to be conveyed, but it didn't distract from anything else, I don't think. And again, just the emotions of the ending were just overpowering. And this will be a film I'll watch again and again and again. And, I'm all on board for like kind of romances that are kind of, I can't think of the word. I'm thinking about it again in terms of Cold War. A romance that isn't quite meant to be, or it is meant to be, but they can't get it together. Like something always gets in the way. There's always a roadblock. And I'm always drawn to those stories because I love to root for a good romance, And so this film did that for me. And while it certainly isn't the best of the year, it's one of the best of the year, I would say, or of last year, 2018. And I think absolutely my favorite. As much as I would love to have Wes Anderson at the top of there, as much as I would love to have put Shirkers there, because I think Shirkers is just like one of the great films about making films, and about a film that never got really made and finished and so on, and all the films I've talked about. But yeah, Disobedience for me, I think is my favourite of 2018, and I highly recommend you check it out if you haven't seen it already. And I'm going to stop talking now because this has been an incredibly long video. I really didn't mean for it to get this long. How the hell am I going to do the list? It's going to be 2-3 hours long. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed. Please leave me your thoughts down below. What your top 20 films of the year was, or what your top 10 films of the year was, and if there's any you think I missed, although a lot of the big movies of the year are in my next video, which will be my top 30 damn good films of 2018. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
It's alright by me. Apart from the fact he throws cans and Carlin into a tree. Yeah, he's really cool. Yeah, he's really cool. he's not quite as cool as you, 'cause